email with the recording. This webinar is heavily attended, so some of you may find yourselves in overflow space in Teams, which will not allow you to actually reach us by messaging for Q&A towards the end of the session. We apologize. With that said, there will be a follow-up email after this event, which will share the recorded session, a copy of the presentation we'll be going over today, directions for getting your questions answered, and of course an opportunity to reach us to further engage on some of the things we'll be talking about today. Also, all participants will be muted for the duration of the webinar and you will not be able to unmute yourself. Some quick introductions on our presenters today. Andrew Kim from Steelcase Education is going to be kicking us off, followed by Joel Evans talking about blended solution implementations at Northeastern University. John Mitten is going to be walking us through a solution called the Red Thread Broadcast Studio, followed by Roseanne Cohen, who's going to help us understand how we can leverage CARES Act funding and also think about other funding sources as we move forward and tackle the challenges of hybrid learning. And then lastly, the last 30 minutes of this session will be a panel discussion led by Tom Napolitano. And with that, I'll hand the presentation over to Andrew Kim.
Thanks, Yamin, for the introductions. And so, so I'm a design researcher with Steelcase, and we're known for our manufacturing of education, furniture, products, architecture, furniture, and technology. But we're very much passionate about human insights, user insights, and kind of the behaviors within space and how we can help support performance of individuals and teams. And we've been studying blended learning for a number of years now. And the question that we've been kind of asking ourselves has been, how might we support active learning within hybrid and blended learning environments? How can the built environment better support kind of the pedagogical goals that are required for the space? And with that in mind, kind of the overall approach that we have in thinking about learning experiences is really this active learning ecosystem and thinking about pedagogy, space, technology. So obviously starting with kind of the pedagogical goals, but then how does space and technology, how can they be used as levers, and how do you kind of think about kind of the balance of those to support the active learning goals? And in today's kind of context and thinking about hybrid and blended learning environments, it's important to think about both physical and virtual space. And so I wanted to kind of share some of the 4 key insights from our research and then talk about design principles and then show you some examples of how that might play out in the environment. And so the first key insight is just that from what we've been seeing prior to the pandemic and what we expect to see continuing is the shift to higher order skills and tailored experiences. That when we think about learning experiences, and we often reference Bloom's taxonomy, that the experiences that are being needed by educators and in what we're seeing is that it's moving from remembering and understanding to higher order skills of applying, evaluating, creating. And so, with that in mind, how does technology and the space, how does that need to adapt? And then a second key insight, students and educators have a variety of levels of comfort and experience with the different types of models and tools, and this was the case before the pandemic, but was very much clear during the pandemic. And we saw varying levels of professional development training. In some cases, there was a email that was sent the day before before the classrooms had to shift to these new models, or in other cases, we saw more kind of preparation. And so to keep that in mind. And we've been working with University of Melbourne on a multi-year project looking at educator mindset and to think about what is that kind of appropriate transition. And they've kind of identified 14 key patterns that educators and schools go through. Things like thinking about collaboration and professional development, or thinking about strategic vision as well. And so they have a number of resources that are available from that multi-year project, and thinking about educator transition, and thinking about kind of educator mindset as well, and how do you kind of prepare schools and students. The third key insight is really thinking about the built environment is being asked to do more, and there's more demands as the learning experiences are moving to higher order cognitive activities, thinking about collaboration, discussion, other active learning kinds of practices, deeper learning methods. And so there's more that the environment needs to support. And then finally, technology can connect and disconnect us from others. That it's been great to see how technology has been used to continue connections between educators and students. But we also know that there's ways that technology can disconnect us from others, whether it's in the physical space and thinking about kind of the physicality of screens, or just the kind of the gravitational nature of screens and people kind of looking at screens, or just to the one of the learnings that we had was just that interactions are more formal when it tends to be technology oriented, that there's less opportunities for kind of social interactions, and how do you make sure you infuse social interactions in the overall educational experience as well. And so with those four insights in mind, the key design principles that we think about in the shift to hybrid and blended learning are the five key principles that you see here. And so the first is just mindset and preparedness, and thinking about how do you prepare educators, but also students in the transition, and thinking about not only kind of the platforms, but also thinking about things like the training that's needed, or kind of the communities of practice, or the continuous kind of communication that is needed as well. And so how do those all tie together in order to kind of create that foundation that's needed, and being much more kind of strategic in the overall approach. And then following that, hear me, see me, and it was deliberate to have hear me before see me, and that one of the things that we often have heard, that audio matters a lot, and if students can't hear the instructor, that's a key issue. And so how might you be more deliberate in thinking about kind of the audio needs, but also thinking about what are some of the video needs that are needed, both for the remote students, but also thinking about kind of the local students too, and thinking about the overall arrangement of the space. And then thinking about braiding the physical and digital, or we like to use the term pencils and pixels, that we know that the combination of the speed of thought tools like whiteboards and post-it notes, those are helpful along with the tech tools, and how do you better host technology in the space. And then finally, the last two, fixed, fluid, and flexible, thinking about what are the elements in the space that are permanent and can't be moved, but what are the ones that can be moved with some assistance, or things that are much more user controlled. And so how do you kind of provide that spectrum of agility in terms of the space, and providing that control. And then finally, density, geometry, and division. This is thinking about safety of the educators and students, and thinking about what's the appropriate density, what's kind of the orientation of the furniture, and then what might be some additional division in the space as well. And so with that in mind, wanted to just share a few ways of thinking about space. And so this is an example of a multimodal high flex classroom, and thinking about how might you provide choice to students. So choice in terms of the students accessing the class session, but also providing them choice in the kind of how they are sitting, the arrangement of the furniture. And so the students are able to move around and swivel, and then the teachers can quickly kind of transition to different types of configurations. And so we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about these kinds of flexible environments and how that impacts engagement. And so we've developed an instrument called the Lee Learning Environments Evaluation, and we've had the opportunity to get responses from over 14,000 students and over 800 educators on highly flexible kinds of spaces. And what we see is that there is an increase in engagement, that students are interacting and communicating more with their peers and the educator, and they're moving more in this space as well. And they're also seeing some benefits in terms of creative and analytical skills that are being used in the space. And maybe another comment, there's different ways to think about the technology. And so in this case, we have fixed displays in the back for the remote students and microphones from the ceiling. I think there's other ways to think about the technology, whether it's carts that can be brought into this space to share technology across multiple spaces, or thinking about other types of audio tools that can be used, whether it's audio amplifiers or maybe kind of microphones that incorporate kind of beam types of technology to help kind of provide better sound quality in the space. This other example of a space, which we call the Learn Lab Classroom, which is this X configuration. And this is really about thinking about removing hierarchy, providing multiple stages for the educator, and allowing students to quickly transition from mode to mode, from lecture mode to kind of whole class discussion mode to individual group mode as well. And so you can imagine in this kind of space, which can support higher active kind of cognitive learning cognitive activities, as well as students are able to connect with potentially with their remote classmates through the individual kind of tech tables that you see here. And so it's really about kind of hearing and seeing others, whether they're remote or we've often heard too that the display can be a strong center of gravity, that they can physically block views. And so in this case, the displays are able to kind of lower so that the attention can be on the instructor. And so University of Michigan has done a nice study in looking at this type of configuration, which we were able to get a patent on. And what they had done was they had created a observation kind of coding schema, and they were able to observe activities that indicated attention versus not paying attention. And what they found was that when instructors were moving and when students were also in the swivel chairs and the use of tools like whiteboards, those led to increased attention. And so thinking about those kinds of behaviors, how that might increase attention and engagement in the space. This is a multi-zoned media lab classroom, and this is thinking about a range of zones in the space that can support different types of activities, whether it's individual self-directed learning or group mode or kind of instructor-led activities as well, in providing that sense of zoning and partition. And so we've been working with Virginia Tech on their media lab classroom, and they're doing a very exciting study where they've installed 8 cameras around the perimeter of the space, and they're comparing this active learning space with a traditional rows and column classroom to understand what are some of the differences in terms of movement. And so they've been using technologies like open pose and other types of visual analysis kinds of tools to understand movement. And so that project is ongoing, but we're excited about kind of the work that's being done. But and so this kind of space, I think, supports, again, higher level learning, but there's opportunities to also kind of think about this within the context of hybrid kinds of classes. This is what we call the multi-node tele-classroom, and this is thinking about maybe more of a seminar kind of a context, and think about how you might connect multiple campuses. And so in this case, we were working with 3 different liberal arts colleges, Calvin, Albion, and Alma, and there was a desire to kind of connect these 3 campuses to share resources. And so as one example, there was a sociology professor that was teaching at all 3 campuses simultaneously, and the sociology was not offered. That sociology class was not offered in the other campuses. And so I think this is a good example of how to use space to share resources. Some of the learnings that we had gotten from this was just the importance of being able to see the remote node in a persistent manner, that once the remote node was not in view, they were often forgotten, or the importance of social interactions, that the classes would take breaks during the class session, and those are important times to kind of have informal interactions, that there's a need to kind of build trust and have those kind of social interactions between students and instructors as well. And so you can see some of the other principles being played out in terms of the digital and analog, and thinking about side spaces too. And we saw that was a big need, and still kind of a question of how best to do that, but to support some of those breakout sessions as well during the class session in kind of a mixed presence type of class session. And just to kind of show you kind of how these kind of might play out in actual spaces, and that these principles of active learning do work in kind of larger kinds of contexts, whether it's a flat floor or tiered kind of classroom space. And then just a few more slides and thinking about kind of moving ahead. Some of the questions that we're asking ourselves through this research is, how might we support hybrid learning in informal spaces that oftentimes there's a lot of important interactions that occur before and after class. There may be interactions between students or opportunities to kind of ask the faculty member a question. And so how might these kinds of spaces, whether it's indoor or outdoor, how might these support kind of a mixed presence or hybrid kind of context? Or even thinking about maker spaces in this type of loud environment, or experiences where you might need to zoom in to the making of things. How might hybrid classroom spaces support these types of learning experiences? And then finally, thinking about even AR, VR environments, and some of the experiences could be hybrid in nature, but how do you support some of the interactions that are occurring in this space, and how do you invite others who are remote into the overall experience, and not only the virtual experience, and thinking about kind of how people kind of view into the space, and how might these kinds of spaces be kind of learning classroom kinds of spaces. So that are some of the questions and things that we're kind of thinking about moving ahead. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joel.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much, Andrew. Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Evans. I'm the Executive Advisor at Infused Innovations. My specialties are unified communications and emerging technologies. And today I'm going to take you through a journey that we had at Northeastern University, both before and during COVID. I know it seems like a long time ago. So to start it off, just think about it this way. The timeline actually started back in March 2019. And as I mentioned, it was through COVID, so through December 2020. I was brought to Northeastern to work on and define a unified communications transformational initiative and strategy. So we started out by taking a look at the technology that was in place at Northeastern. This included meeting rooms and classrooms and other areas. And as I advise Northeastern, just like I advise other clients, a lot of times it's not just about the technology, it's also about the culture. So that was really the focus of the start of the whole work, was taking a look at the technology, taking a look at the culture. And the vision was really about enabling communication and collaboration from anywhere at any time with anyone on any device. So we were taking a look at all the latest Microsoft products, all the latest Teams first technology that was out there, and also established what we called our enhanced collaboration and communication experience. So really a whole lot of things that we were tackling at the beginning of March 2019. I think the biggest thing, and I mentioned here in the culture piece, is a lot of people think, okay, I'll just throw technology at it, but you have to think back to a time, and it does seem like it's a long time ago, but March 2019, where the majority of the people in a meeting or a classroom were in person, and bringing in a remote participant was not a primary thought. And a lot of times, if enough people collected in person and you were having some technology challenges related to bringing in that remote person, you gave up and sort of told them to tune in at a later time. And that was really one of the big pieces that I sort of started focusing on when it came to start on the initiative with Northeastern. So I started by walking around and sort of did an audit of all the different technology that was in place. And not being familiar with Northeastern before the engagement, as I started walking around, I was blown away at the technology that was in place. A lot of it was state of the art, and it was really more about, and I think we'll cover this a little later. It was really more about the challenges of adopting that technology. If it wasn't a quick little click, then it was going to delay somebody, starting a classroom session or starting a meeting or whatever the case may be. So what I ended up doing was partnering with both Red Thread and Microsoft to really take a look at how we could truly transform and embrace some of the new technology. So at the time, the next generation of the Surface Hub, which you can see pictured here, was being talked about, but no one really had their hands on it. So we were taking a look at that. We were taking a look at the first generation Surface Hub. So really just seeing how we could, again, encourage people embracing this new world of connecting, remote participants. And just to give you a little bit of background, I've got decades of experience running companies and teams remotely. So, this was back in the day of people using, Skype or whatever, the latest flavor of a chat system might be. And what I saw prevalent at Northeastern were students and faculty and staff sort of breaking out in these separate rooms that had a lot of technology in them. And because of either, a challenge of getting that technology to work or whatever the case may be, they were having the engagement over a laptop instead of using the technology that was there. So it was an interesting challenge and an exciting challenge to really take a look at it from a technology and a culture standpoint, and really focus on encouraging the communication and collaboration from anywhere. So what we did in that timeline was we ordered a whole bunch of Surface Hubs. We used a Logitech Tap. We used a bunch of different technologies, as I listed here: Hubs, Pros, Goes, iPads, Macs, anything you could think of, and really tried to show people how easy it was and how effortless it was to communicate and collaborate. Now, again, this was pre-COVID, so most people were in person. There wasn't this impetus of making sure that we could communicate and collaborate interactively with remote people. So then, of course, we all know what happened. So, enter COVID, and COVID hit. And at Northeastern, we had a tremendous amount of planning sessions, just like I'm sure others did at other universities. As a matter of fact, I know others did at other universities because I was on a number of those calls as well. And as everyone remembers, we really didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know if all of a sudden everybody was going to have to leave campus, if the classrooms were going to be in a hybrid scenario. We really didn't know. We were fortunate at Northeastern to have invested in a bunch of different technology and really looked at all those different scenarios, looked at Microsoft Teams and the different technologies that can enable it, and said, okay, well, if we have to enter into any of these scenarios, are we prepared? Do we have what we need to have in place? And again, the partnership with Red Thread and Microsoft was just, absolutely incredible for this whole experience, because we didn't know what we didn't know. And not just us, but I think really everybody. We really had no idea what was coming next. So what did we do? We took a look at what we had, we retooled, we adapted, and we innovated. And I think that was really the key to our success. So when you think about it, and I'm sure others on this call, can join me in this thinking, is we said, what do we have and how do we adapt? How are we going to make sure that we can, stay, I guess, in business, you could say, as a university, but in business overall? We were having that at Infused with all of our clients. Everyone was talking about how we can continue to do business and stay the course in this challenging time. How can we embrace the technology we've invested in? What technology do we need to invest in? Again, if you think back, the supply chains dried up. It was hard to even get a webcam going. So, we embraced hybrid fast. We looked at our processes and we tried to automate them and streamline them as fast as we can. The craziest thing was, rolling Surface Hubs into hotels and into classrooms that once housed hundreds were only going to now house, maybe a teacher or maybe a teacher and some students. In the case of Northeastern, we had a Teams calls migration initiative going. So we accelerated that so that people could communicate and collaborate, remotely, like I mentioned, and really re-engineered our collaboration and experience project, where we had purchased a bunch of Surface Hubs, and the plan was to roll them out across campus, really globally, as communication and collaboration accelerators. And same thing with Surface Pros and letting people see the ease of use of communication and collaboration. So now we were really tested to deliver on that 100%. So as you can see in these pictures, in this case, we've got two different rooms that were retrofitted into classrooms. And as you can see, we rolled the Surface Hub in there and plugged into the existing AV equipment, and we were able to get things up and running. And again, we really didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know how long this was going to have to be. Thankfully, again, you know, I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. We had the partnership going with Red Thread and Microsoft. So we had these Surface Hubs that were delivered with the OS designed for the Surface Hubs. We were fortunate to be very early on, and we were selected and allowed to put Windows 10 on those hubs, and that allowed us to really run just about anything we needed to run to get going. So it was a pretty crazy time. You know, started off all March 2019 planning and had this, you know, wide eyes about all the great things I was going to be doing with Northeastern and we were going to be doing together. But then, you know, we were hit with the challenge, and we definitely overcame that challenge. We retooled, we adapted, we innovated. You know, I can't say it enough. It was absolutely a fantastic time in that respect, because it did push everything to the limit. You really had to think way outside the box to make sure that you stayed to, you know, business as usual as much as you possibly could. And the other piece being, you know, we were designing these Surface Hubs to be rolled around really just about anywhere and turn pretty much any spot into a impromptu classroom or learning area or whatever the case may be. And we really had to put that to the test and continue to have to put that to the test as we live in this new time. So a lot of the things that I get asked are, you know, is this now going to be our new normal? And I'm sure we've got some questions we'll cover after the presentation as well. Is this just something we invested in? Do we have to continue to do this? As you saw from Andrew's presentation, they've got a whole bunch of different models for ways to structure learning environments going forward. And I think that is, you know, 100% here to stay. I love this picture because it shows the students are engaging. Notice there's no masks, but you've got a full remote session going on behind them, and it's positioned so that the teacher can be successful. You know, what I didn't mention previously is not only did we roll those Surface Hubs into impromptu rooms to turn them into learning areas and classrooms, but we also had Surface Hubs at some teachers' locations at their homes because the teachers were teaching remotely. We also looked at Surface Go's and webcams and hotspots, really just to try and take as much of the guesswork as we could away from the teachers and make them as comfortable as we could for the professors to continue to be able to teach, you know, through COVID. And there's a lot of them are still doing that today. But as I mentioned, you know, when you take a look at the world we're going to be in now, it's really the new normal. So what we always tell our clients and is it's all about assessing what you have in place. So very similar to how I started out, you know, pre-COVID, assess what you have in place today and plan and innovate. And what I mean by that is a lot of people are saying, okay, well, you know, what do I have in place? It's like, well, what you likely have in place is a lot of emergency scenarios where you had to get up and running as fast as you possibly could. You probably, you know, didn't necessarily invest in all the latest stuff that you would have had you thought that this was now going to be your new world. So, you know, take a moment, take that step back and see what you have in place today. Put a plan in place. And then my favorite thing to do is you build out proof of concepts. You know, the Red Thread folks will tell you we did more than our fair share of proof of concepts just to see how things were going to work out and what technologies would work well together and play together. And then, you know, last but not least, certainly don't be afraid to innovate. I think that's a key piece here. A lot of the challenges that we saw a lot of our clients and a lot of other universities having is that they were, you know, a little concerned about what this technology environment was going to look like, what this new teaching world was going to be. And, you know, the key is to not be afraid to innovate. And, you know, last but not least, I think that The students, the teachers, staff, etc. Everyone is accustomed to this now. This new hybrid model. And as you saw from Andrew's slides, there's going to be a lot of different configurations happening in a lot of different classrooms. And this is just going to be the world that we continue to grow into. And last but not least, I always say that don't think about the technology. That's my problem. Just think about what you want to accomplish, and we'll make it work for you. And that's what we did at Northeastern. That's what we did for other clients. And I think what you'll see as I turn it over to John Mitten, the CTO of Red Thread, is that they've done exactly what I'm prescribing here. They've taken that step back and they've really innovated to take a lot of the guesswork and a lot of the pain of this new normal, this new hybrid model. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Joel. I appreciate that. I want to welcome everyone to Red Thread. I'm presenting today from our work life here in Boston. It's not a classroom, but it is part of our home. Actually, where I'm presenting in is our work cafe, is where our people normally would come together and group together and communicate and collaborate. But I thought it would be a great opportunity today to kind of show Broadcast Studio in a different environment, but hopefully you get a lot of benefit out of this. And a lot of things that Joel had talked about and Andrew about the integration of technology in space, which is really embedded into the way that Red Thread looks and approaches problems. And we try to be innovative as possible, and I think you'll like Broadcast Studio. So let's go into it. So Broadcast Studio, I saw this over the weekend, and it kind of caught my eye. Granted, this is back from 2011, and it says, my last slide, any comments? And then everyone is dazed and confused, feeling like they lost an hour of their life. And the other part of it is the expectations of the presenter. And I think, after initial burst of activity and engagement with remote, people said, oh, this is great. We're going to have, we can go 100% remote. We can do remote learning. We can do remote work. We're finding that people are now thinking that the productivity gains, the things that brought on and we thought were so good on remote are maybe not as great. And we're starting to see some slide back. So with that in mind, we decided we would go forward and look at other alternatives. But I do have a pop quiz. Seeing this is an education event, who drives your remote classroom strategy or digital transformation? Who did that going forward? Was it the president of the university? The provost of the university? Dean of facilities? Or the CIO? And you should have now a poll up on your screen that would ask you to kind of take your best guess on who was driving that change in your organization. Okay? And if you don't know, just take any old guess. It's a lot of fun here to see what's going on. So right now, you can see me, you can see your Surface Hub background, and this is the way that some people that engaged with technology was the way they were going to market. I would ask another favor of everyone that's remote. Please turn on your camera. I actually want to see people. And there's only a few people and I know that's a little bit different than most presentations when you're doing webinars. So I thank you. I appreciate everyone turning it on. Now I can actually engage and see what you guys are seeing and whether I'm making a connection or not. So right now, this is a typical presentation going forward. We're in presentation mode. I'm going to step out of that presentation mode, and I'm going to call up a whiteboard. And I think you guys can all see the whiteboard here in some simulation next. But if I want to drive in a little bit deeper, you now can see all the remote participants underneath the board on your side, me still engaging with you, and the whiteboard, all in one image and screen. But this seems kind of weird, and my handwriting's not all that great. So let me go forward is let's fix my handwriting. My handwriting is horrible. Let's go ahead and beautify that. So what we want to talk about today is the why we did what we did at Red Thread, and what are the problems we're trying to solve as we go forward with the broadcast studio. So what you guys don't see, what I have in front of me right now is 49 people, and that's why I asked everyone to show. So this is using the camera that's on the Surface Hub and going forward, and I can engage with you. I can see whether what I'm saying, the comments I'm making, are actually registering it with you. I can now understand what's happening. I have the chat over to the right, so I can see what our responses were. So we had 17 people that said present at the university drove transformation. 17% said the provost. 13 said the director of facility, and 51% of the respondents, 66, said it was the CTO or CIO. It was a trick question, just so you know that. It was COVID that is driving transformation. It's COVID and the pandemic, which is driving the change within organizations. So I want to thank you for that. But with that, oh, I'm also seeing some chat here showing up on the board at the same time. So what I'd like to do is kind of step through the steps that we went through, why we designed the broadcast studio the way we did. And for that, I'll go into full presentation mode. And full presentation mode, back last March, everyone had a rush to remote. We had to go and get everything up and going. I think Joel did a great job of explaining what happened. You know, people continue some resemblance of a day-to-day experience going forward. And I think everyone did a pretty fabulous job on that. But back in May, I had the opportunity to guest lecture with the university and talk about the classroom of the future. And when I started talking about the classroom of the future, I immediately went back to pre-COVID. And then when I started talking to the students, we said, this is not going to, you know, at that point we were still thinking it was going to be 15 days to bend the curve, whatever it was, but you know, we're way beyond that. So I started to hear some general themes from the students and the professors. And it was lack of innovation, creativity, engagement, and experience. People were surviving. They weren't thriving in the remote experience. So I think that was a big learning for me as I listened to go forward about that. But then the summer came. As Joel had said, everyone went into implementation mode. So they had to go forward and they had to get things going, up and going as fast as they could. We had classes coming up in September. So there was a great struggle to get as many classrooms set up for blended learning or remote learning as possible. And then back in September, we went back to learning. Oh. Let me try that one more time. Here we go. So we went back to learning. And I also, at that point, had another opportunity to guest lecture with another group of students, another different professor. And lo and behold, towards the end of September, what I heard were the same problems I heard back in May. And I found that very discouraging for, you know, all the time and effort that people had put into the event and going forward. So I thought that was pretty disappointing to me. But there was also something else that happened in the end of September. I had an opportunity to hear a lecture by a Dr. Killerman in Australia. Dr. Killerman was talking about this thing called a self-produced studio. How can you go and create a solution that a professor could walk into a space and to be able to engage on a much deeper level than just PowerPoint slides and talking heads? And we thought that really made a lot of sense to us, and we really went forward and started looking at that. So at that point, we now went forward and we re-engineered what the Professor Killerman was doing. And we looked at his solution and it felt it was great. I have great admiration for Professor Killerman and what he did, and he sparked us on, but we tried to look at, he was looking at a software-based solution that would require a level of expertise that I don't think most professors or most people within universities would be wanting to do, and I felt it wasn't scalable. It's not a knock at all what the professor did, and he and I have been talking and engaging since. So we went forward to create what we feel is an application or an appliance to go forward and create an appliance to do Broadcast Studio. And that's what you're seeing me use today. So with that being said, I'll kind of step us through the Broadcast Studio, the elements, so you can understand what makes it up. Come on, PowerPoint, there we go. So these were the design elements that we had looked at for Broadcast Studio. We wanted to make sure that when it was appropriate, people could see what the professor was writing on the board. An example would be a STEM class where their formula was being written, that someone wants to see what's being written, the demonstration. Also, we wanted where it made sense that when the professor wanted to connect, engage, that he was able to do it really quickly. And we wanted to make sure, probably a big important about this, is the ability to compete against a TikTok, Netflix environment that is created over the pandemic. That everyone's used to video, everyone's used to things changing quickly, being able to have much more control. So we thought that that was a key element of creating an engaging solution for our customers and for the students. So this is a Broadcast Studio at this point. We have a camera over here. We have the far side over here, which is the images of where I can see all the remote participants and engage with the remote participants if we need to. We have a control tablet, which is very basic and easy to be able to switch camera solutions, scenes. And we have the interactive whiteboard. We designed this as a self-contained unit at first. And we kind of looked at this and said, this would be the on-stage, similar to a TV production. And then we had off-stage here. And this person can be a teacher's assistant, or in the case of an executive, it could be an assistant, and they could help manage the chat, they could help manage the screen flow, but that person is not required. Right now, I am doing and controlling all the scene changes on myself using the controller. Here's the controller, the interactive whiteboard, the camera that picks up me in the front view, and the camera that picks up the people on the remote side. So that is a Broadcast Studio in its simplest forms. We have a couple options here, and one of the options is to be able to go forward and do a green screen. And the green screen will allow you to be immersed in the data. So we have a university here locally that finds that that's important as part of their way of teaching, that they want the professors engaged in a green screen and engaged in the data. So that's what we did. We also feel that there are a number of professors that are going to be still want to use analog. So you can actually go use and pick up an analog whiteboard right on a board, and because you're going to be on a mat, it will be able to pick up and share with the remote participants everything that's going on in the analog whiteboard. So the ability to digitalize analog content. And we feel that's really important going forward. As I had mentioned earlier, this is the control panel. One of the things that you may not have noticed is that I have a preview. I can see everything that's happening. I know exactly what you're seeing, which gives confidence to the professor. It says, I know what the remote students are seeing. I know that I can present with confidence. I know that I can go forward and be working the way I want to work. In addition to that, there's just an example of the remote participants in a together mode. Could be a classroom configuration to allow people to be more in a natural mode with a chat feature here. So these are some of the ways that we see it working in a classroom configuration. The broadcast studio could be here. You'd have your interactive display here. You'd have your remote camera. You'd have your remote participants over here with the camera that can pick up the instructor or the camera that can pick up the in-classroom in the remote. We have an board that could be another allow the instructor to go over and write on the whiteboard and pick up everything they say. In a bigger environment, here's one in a larger environment, but the big thing here is we are rolling out right now an ability to go forward and to be able to roll in a broadcast studio into an existing space, connect to existing projectors, connect to existing investments that people have made, similar to what Joel was showing when he showed the images of Northeastern with the drop-down screen, that you would be able to leverage those investments you've already made and to be able to create a good experience. And just give you an example, this is what the remote participants would see, or the in-room participants would see of the instructor. Another place where we're being asked quite a bit to look at is a seminar room. You know, classrooms are pretty easy people to think of, but you know, as we're showing this to a number of universities and educators, they're coming back with how can we use this in observation rooms in medical schools, which we're doing for a university. How can we handle seminar rooms in business schools or in legal schools, you know, to go forward. So this is a configuration, a little bit more that allows a small in-house in-room experience and a remote with the input, cameras, and displays. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about was that there is a kind of a change going on now. And in this recent survey, 75% of associates of MBAs and business grad associates, a survey was just done, where they feel within the next 5 years, 75% of classrooms will be in a blended or hybrid model. I found that amazing to think about that change and what's going to happen. But that is, they're strongly in this, the survey is out there and we can send you the links if you're interested, pretty interesting. But the other part about people are saying, have said to me, John, does the people are going back announcing that they're going back to 100% on campus, does that mean the broadcast studio is not relevant anymore? And I believe it still is very relevant. A couple of reasons why. Forrester research says COVID will be with us for the next decade in some form or some shape. Hopefully with the vaccines going forward, herd mentality, or excuse me, herd infection, that we will go forward and we will be able to get back to somewhat to normal. But what happens when the next flu happens, next winter? And all of a sudden, are people going to now all say, well, I'm going to rush back to the classroom? I think COVID has basically scarred us. Scarred may be a strong word, but it has had definitely impact on us, that we're now going to be thinking, why wouldn't I do remote first? Much more than we would in the past. So I think it's with us, it's going to be with us for a while. The other piece about this that Forrester brought up is that pandemics are going to be happening more often. One time they were once every 500 years, and they went to 100 years, and 50 years, 10 years. And they feel with globalization and with people traveling around the world that the next pandemic is only 5 or 6 years away. Now, will we react the same way? I think people will fall back onto the learnings that they learned during this pandemic, and will be much more open to go forward to a remote first type of experience to reduce and protect people right away. And then the last piece I think that's kind of interesting here is the impact between privacy and protection. Do students have the right to know that everyone else in their classroom care that the person next to them has been vaccinated? Or do they not? And if they're not comfortable with that, people don't want to share that information, does that mean that they still want to stay and have the option to stay remote? So I think that's going to be a big challenge for universities to go forward. The other thing that was interesting, as I was presenting Broadcast Studio back in December to another group or another classroom, they brought up the option of saying, well, I'm not sure if a person in the classroom should be able to see the remote participants. They felt like it was being intrusive on their privacy. And it's an interesting concept that we don't have a right answer for, but everyone's going to have to struggle with. So, but these are all the things that are going to happen now that we look at a blended learning, people off campus, people on campus, and how they come together. So with that, I'm pretty much done with Broadcast Studio. I know I went through this very quickly. I will one more time step through the different scenes so you know what's going on. So this was a splash page. This is how a class to stop, where people can see the professor, the other participants in the class in the window, depending on how you want to configure it. And that lets them know, and there could be a countdown clock here, so they would know the class starts in minutes. Full camera mode, where I can go ahead as an instructor, can come in, bring everyone together, talk about the topics of the day, go forward, and then they can start sharing their presentation mode with the remote and the presentation. The whiteboard, where I'm able to go forward and connect with you, and you can see my face. And then the last is everyone in the classroom. We are not limited to these number of scenes. These are just the scenes that we felt were relative. There can be additional numbers of cameras and inputs, like we said with some of the observation classrooms we're doing for med schools. They want it connected to a mannequin. They'd like an additional camera, so multiple cameras in the observation room so they can see what the doctors are training for and what they're doing. So a lot of different capabilities here, and also the ability to go forward and to record all this. So with that, I will shut up at this point. I appreciate everyone's attention. With that, we'd like to kick it over to Roseanne, if she could share your content and talk about how we could possibly go forward and pay for some of these great solutions.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. And again, I'm Roseanne Cohen, Industry Solutions Marketing Manager for Logitech, and I'm also the Grant Services Program Manager. You've seen a lot of really innovative ways to support active learning and hybrid learning and blended learning across a variety of different environments. And so now what I'd like to help you do is to connect the dots between those innovative solutions and how in the world you're going to fund them or pay for them, because we know there's a cost when you start introducing technology into the classroom. Logitech has seen a number of school districts face the same challenge of where's funding going to come from. And so we've implemented a program called the Grant Services Program. And our #1 mission is to work with eligible organizations to help them unlock funding for Logitech solutions that support vital community services and outreach programs. And so it's not intended to pay for technology. It's intended to support unique and innovative approaches to education. So the community or the audience that you're serving, the student body that you're serving, the value you're bringing is the most important thing to focus on, not the technology. But Logitech is offering this as a complimentary service. And we do this to promote, obviously, our personal collaboration solutions, our conference room cameras, and also to talk about how our room-based video collaboration solutions are meeting the needs across these different environments. And we work with partners like Red Thread and like Steelcase to make sure that our solutions can flexibly adapt into those environments, and then also in an affordable way. So when you think about grant services, who are the customers that are served by this? Well, number one is public sector and nonprofit organizations are truly looking towards grant funding as a way to provide additional funding to support these purchases or to support these community programs. And the reason why these are best served is because they are actually eligible, they have legal eligibility to apply for specific federal and state funding opportunities. So that is our focus: healthcare, education, government, as well as nonprofit customers, the ones who are eligible for these federal grants. And since today we're focused on education solutions, I'm going to focus in on the top recipients, just providing you a list of the public school districts, charter schools in the K through 12 realm. And then as you go into the higher education recipients, universities, libraries and museums, not-for-profit research institutions, these are your leading contenders of organizations who are applying for grants and who are most likely to receive funding through a grant program. And then when you start asking yourself, should I apply for a grant if I'm a higher education institution? And the question is, what's your project? What are you trying to implement within your organization? Are you establishing collaborative learning spaces? Is your organization focused on workforce development? Are you trying to initiate a remote or virtual education learning environment? Are you setting up a new hybrid learning environments or broadcast quality, broadcast studios? What are the types of programs that you're trying to support? And as you can see here in the higher education category, these are the types of funded projects that align very specifically to what you saw offered today in this session. Now, moving on to funding assistance. Our grant services program was established to help organizations go after grant funding. However, the reality is we have a team of grant experts, and a lot of the consulting that we're doing right now is helping educational institutions say, here's how I can use CARES Act funding. How do I build a project plan? How do I write together a justification on how this technology can be served within my organization? So the consulting service that we are providing come not only from a grant services program, we pivoted to really helping guide educational institutions on how to leverage CARES Act funding for their technology purchases. And we do that through our partnership with Red Thread. Now, I'm not going to go into these funding buckets because we could spend the entire day talking about how it's used. But basically what I want you to take away from this slide is that there's three buckets of funding, right? You've got your CARES Act that was signed in March 2020. That was funding that is actually helping to stabilize education institutions. We had a COVID relief package passed in December. That was additional funding that was flooded into the ecosystem. And then we have one looming this week for additional funding opportunities. So what I would like to encourage you to do, if you're a higher education institution, you are looking to leverage these funds, get in touch with your Red Thread account manager, and we can set up a specific consulting conversation with you to discuss how to leverage these funds. But as you're thinking about CARES Act funding, know that that funding has been put in place to help you prepare, respond, and prevent the spread of COVID, right? So this is why the funding was put in place in the first place, to help support continuity of learning, to help prevent learning loss. And so as you're building out your plan, the why of why you need this funding, you need to be thinking about how is your institution addressing learning loss? Are you going to be standing up summer learning programs? Do you need professional development courses? Again, going back to those key leading use cases on how your institution needs to leverage technology to accomplish your overall objectives. Again, so it's not about the technology, it's really, Joel talked a lot about it, about how technology can adapt and change your organization, and that's really what we're focused on. And again, John mentioned what's going to happen when the next pandemic comes by, right? How do we need to flexibly adapt our classrooms to meet the future needs or a future emergency response that may come in place. So again, having great partnerships like a Microsoft UC platform, Red Thread, as well as just the experts in the team can really help you build your story and your plan to serve those communities in need, but just ensure that you're looking to address these key use cases and issues that you're addressing when you're looking to leverage CARES Act funding. And then anytime I talk to a customer about funding sources, the first question I'm going to ask is, what's your project plan? What do you have planned? And one of the things we look to see in an effective project plan is not only that you want to leverage technology to serve preparedness and response plans or to address learning loss, but the other question I'm going to ask you is, who are your community partners? How are you using the technology within the communities that you serve? Are you a higher education institution? Have you thought about working with your university medical institution or university hospital system? Are you working with your local community colleges to extend access to your classes or the services that you're offering? And then what about are you doing any type of local high school programs or supporting after school programs like an esports program, or you can start getting really creative about the different types of programs you're supporting, but these are all pieces and components of a really effective and good project plan. So when Logitech comes into the equation along with Red Thread, obviously we're thinking about are your solutions interoperable? Do they fit into your existing environment? Do they map or align with the UC platforms that you serve? And are they serving that community of interest? Are they serving the needs of your students and your educators in your environment? And then moving forward, it's a very simple process. If you are interested in having us work with you on consulting with you on the funding that's available through CARES Act or through a long-term grants project, we will basically engage with you through Red Thread. So reach out to Red Thread. We are going to sit down with you, consult with you on your project, help to build out your use cases, guide you through the application process, as well as developing a really good proposal to help increase your ability to get funded through those grants. And again, if you're looking to take advantage of CARES Act funding, you're not going to go through that grants process. We're going to sit down with you and really help you build out that justification as to why this technology is needed and how it can help serve the various use cases that you need for your institution. But again, it's just quick and easy. The next step for you is to get in touch with your Red Thread account manager, and we can set up some time to consult with you. And again, free service. It's a value-added program offered through Red Thread, and that's just a quick overview. And thanks so much for your time.
I appreciate your input into all that. So hopefully we kind of stepped you through the process we went through and how to get to where we are today. With that, I'm going to hand over to Tom Napolitano, who will we ask people to ask questions beforehand, so we have some questions that the panel will answer. Go ahead, Tom. You're muted.
Of course I am. One of those, the great sayings of 2020, you're muted. So as John said, my name is Tom Napolitano and I run the Microsoft practice here. First, thank you to the audience for showing up today. We really appreciate it. We hope this was insightful for you guys. And to our presenters and panelists, I really appreciate you guys taking the time today and sharing your thoughts. It's hard to believe that about a year has passed. I believe we're on the 1-year anniversary date of all this happening. Our world's coming to, a complete disruption and a really complete change for all of us. Though here we are a year later, we have a vaccine on the horizon. People are actually talking about returning to work, returning to school, which is all really exciting for all of us. So it kind of brings us to our first question. And Andrew, I'm going to kind of put this to you to start us off here. The specific question is, do you think everything we're talking about today, everything we've shown here, this discussion is really just a fad? And more specifically, with everything changing, we're just starting to design now for the future. If this is just a fad, should we be designing for hybrid? Or should we be moving forward as this is the new norm? And if this is the new norm, is this more because of students are looking for more control of their education and more choice? What do you think, Andrew?
Hey, Tom, that's a great question. So the way I would respond is, one, we've been following blended learning for a number of years now, so the trend was already existing. There was interest, and it met kind of needs of students as well as the needs of educators and, I would say, administration, in thinking about shared resources or thinking about increased enrollment, but also just deeper, I think, authentic types of learning experiences. And then with the pandemic, we saw this spike in particular interest in maybe the model of HyFlex in particular, and allowing students to kind of connect safely as needed. And so I think now we have much more interest and awareness of kind of the different technologies. And so I think that's going to help continue this trend. And I think and we may say particular segments where there's more or even higher embracing of this. So I think in graduate schools where students are often working, or schools that want to increase enrollment or kind of share resources, we'll see that. But in general, I would say there's going to be interest in blended learning. But I think what I would add is that I think we'll see a desire to kind of think more about kind of what are the deep, authentic teaching and learning practices, and how that can be integrated into the different types of blended learning models, whether it's flipped, rotational, or HyFlex. I think that's where we're going to see kind of the next evolution. I think that the current state is focused on safety, and I like to use the word next normal. So we're going to see another normal probably at a later time, and so we have to be prepared to that next normal. But I think thinking more deeply about kind of the transformation of teaching and learning and in authentic teaching and learning practices, that's where I see the shift.
Great. Anyone else? So I have some thoughts.
I'll fill out
so go ahead, Jimmy.
Comment thread. I'm hearing from leaders across New England is learning is about any person, anytime, anywhere. And I really do think that the hybrid learning model speaks to that. It speaks to that asymmetric learning experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Logitech, a lot of what we saw when the pandemic began was that fill in the gaps, right? Plug and play, bring your own device, whatever I can do to make learning work for now. And the way schools are proceeding is they're asking for insight on what's that future classroom look like. A lot of what Andrew demonstrated, a lot of what we saw with the broadcast studio is how can we continue to capture lectures? How can we make learning accessible for students however they want to learn, whether they want to watch videos at home, whether they want to watch it in a station in the classroom. And Andrew mentioned about HyFlex classrooms. HyFlex is all about giving students choice on where they want to learn from. So absolutely, we're seeing a shift to that hybrid learning model and learning from anywhere.
I was just gonna say, if I could just build on what you were saying too, what I found fascinating is as we were, moving into this world of kids actually going back to school, when they were starting to come back to school, tail end of last year. I have a lot of friends whose children were, going into college for the first time, and I was asking, are they excited? And the greatest thing is that they were. So however we managed through this whole thing, it didn't change their expectation of what they were going to get out of college. They're obviously hoping to have, as new normal as they can, but they weren't put off. So kudos to I guess all of us and the educators and the universities for adapting as fast as they could and trying to create a welcome environment for them to return to.
John, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things. I think this past year has also opened a lot of new channels of way of learning and using and leveraging technology, just not video conferencing, but other technologies like Microsoft Teams or ecosystems that are going to mean that people don't have to be in the same room like they were in the past to share content, to be able to connect. I mentioned Dr. Killiman earlier. He did a great presentation about the use of artificial intelligence and bots to manage classrooms at the time that were 500 students. In his satisfaction survey, by using and applying those technologies, raised substantially, and he didn't need to have 500 people in a classroom at a time. So that is something I think that's going to really change and dramatic. The other piece that I think is going to really happen is that, what is the phrase, 60 days or 90 days to create a new behavior? And we've been into this new environment for a year. And I think that students are going to demand a different way of consuming education. And they may not want to go back to the old normal. They are going to say, why do I have to be at a classroom as a designated time when I could be doing other things or doing differently? And that just doesn't mean taking classes and videotaping and them throwing out on the internet. It's a different way of looking at the way that people demand that way that they can consume education. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's okay, but actually it brings up a good point. We're a year into this, from a school year perspective, we're coming to the end of a higher education semester coming up again. So we're 2 semesters into this. What have we learned, or should I say, what are the most common elements that we believe we need for hybrid learning? In the beginning, it was video. We had to get the professor to be seen, right? But is there more than that? Is it more than just being seen? We just demonstrated today, there's a lot of different ways. John, you mentioned TikTok. You mentioned, other video contents. We're talking about content in general. What is needed to keep people engaged and make this work long term?
I would say, I would say I didn't want to jump in, but I mean it's sort of what I live by, right? It's communication and collaboration from anywhere with anyone at any time on any device. I can tell you stories pre-COVID. I could tell you stories during COVID where people are literally anywhere, and I've been literally anywhere on my iPhone and going from a phone call to a Teams communication and collaboration experience to drawing on a virtual whiteboard. So I really think, to what John was saying, we've really removed the boundaries that were once put in place. At the beginning of this whole thing, and everybody was working remotely, I would always start every meeting with my with my webcam on, and people would say, "Oh, you're video shaming me. Hold on, I got to clean myself up." I'm like, "You don't have to clean yourself up. Just get on." And I think that we've really broken down those walls, and I think, as I mentioned before, it's a culture and a technology thing. But I think that we have to stop overthinking it and just realize if the kids are willing to go to the university and learn from their dorm room because they, could only get into the lottery to go into the classroom for 2 days of that week, they're adapting. So we should take a step back and adapt too.
I'd say one of the things that Logitech has seen is, regardless of where you're learning, engagement is off the charts, right? Educators have become creators. They're developing Bitmoji classrooms. They're developing all kinds of ways to interact with these online tools, and they want their students to be able to interact with these documents as well. We have tools like your mice and keyboards that increase efficiency of your clicks, your drags, and how you develop that digital experience. But now students are saying, how do I annotate? How do I engage? And an instructor, like on the broadcast studio, wants to annotate and draw and engage with that content and give students the ability to also interact with that. The beautiful thing about that interactivity and that engagement is that it improves learning outcomes, right? The more they interact with the content, the more they are able to absorb the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love when John started his presentation and said, "Wait, everybody turn your webcams on," right? And I'm sure that people were like, "Wait, what's behind me? What do I look like?" And it's like, just get on. It's all about engaging. It's all about experiencing each other's, faces and facial interactions and really making that connection. So very well said.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, I'm so used to using the broadcast studio now and having that feedback from the other side. It was disconcerting to me to start without anyone there. It's like, am I talking into the abyss? And awesome. I appreciate everyone turning their camera on, because it makes, as a presenter, a much more engaging conversation, and hopefully you saw some of the energy or the enthusiasm that adds to the process, to be able to see affirmation of people nodding and saying, yes, I agree, or no, I'm going down the wrong path. So I appreciate everyone turning their video on.
I think maybe just to add too that, in this kind of mixed presence context that we live in, and it's been great to kind of see how educators and students are kind of addressing the presence disparity issue that we see. And so thinking about how do you allow remote attendees, how can they connect better? And I think it's exciting to kind of see some of the new audio technologies, because I think there's going to be a lot more interest and consideration for the use of audio, and how do you allow local students to be able to hear the remote and vice versa, and thinking about that, as well as just kind of the visual kind of size or kind of presence that the remote attendees have in the space as well, that you need to think about, equal kind of presence across distance. But maybe to emphasize Joel's comment about culture, I mean, I think what's key is really thinking about what's the strategic vision that the school has, what's kind of the policies that they have in place, and then what's kind of the professional development and communities of practice that are needed to really think smartly about kind of the teaching and learning experiences.
I'll mention really quickly on the end here that from a couple of CIOs I'm working with to implement teams for teaching, and it's an ongoing process. Some faculty obviously choose to use Zoom or whatever their preferred technology is, but as we roll out massively on some campuses, CIOs have a very clear sense through their teams, through feedback from their faculty, of exactly what capabilities they need to see in these solutions. We really don't have time to cover it entirely, but we all know that Blackboard or Canvas integration with key capabilities. I think getting to teams and getting to the ability to do both symmetrical teaching and asymmetric teaching are key for some schools and some educators. But there's a lot of parts and pieces. And John, Microsoft's very excited to see Broadcast Studio a month ago when you brought it to us. And we're really excited to see it working today during this presentation.
Great.
Roseanne, this might be question, next one might be more towards you, but anybody feel free to jump in. Obviously we're talking about a lot of new technologies here. We may have just gone through, CARES Act 1 and made a lot of retrofits. Now we've maybe learned we need some newer technologies. So specifically more for the smaller colleges and universities with small capital budgets and endowments, how did you even start to think about, funding newer products like this?
I think the first thing is to really engage with your Red Thread account manager. And I say that because there is a process, there's a funding process that you have to go through, and you want to engage grant experts. And the first step through that, to do that, is through Red Thread. Once we engage with you and your environment, and we understand what you're trying to accomplish and achieve, we will then go search for the funding sources that are specific to your community college, your project, or whatever type of school or university that you have. So I think, again, just engage with Red Thread. I mean, it's just a call away to get in touch with grant experts or even funding experts to guide you through the CARES Act funding to help you put together the why of justification and how this technology will justify or serve your needs. So we can help you with that.
And if I could build on that too, I mean, this was key to my success at Northeastern, is the partnership with Microsoft and Red Thread. So really, at Infused, we try to demystify the technology so we can work with Red Thread and Microsoft and Logitech, and we can all work together. That's why we all came together on this panel, and Andrew can help look at what the classroom solutions are for now and for the future. But really, don't think about the technology. Let the Red Thread folks, the Logitech folks, Microsoft, myself, let us think about the technology. Let's just look at what your problem is that you're trying to solve as you move to the next level.
Exactly. And the communities you're serving.
Exactly. Perfect.
Right. Here's an interesting question, and this might be more of a generational thing, because I don't know if kids that are in school today necessarily feel the same way, but let's get your take on it. If a student is in class, are they going to feel equally valued if I'm not in class? Is there going to be an issue with those remote participants feeling like they're being left out, they're not part of the group. That meeting might start late, that meeting might start early. They don't necessarily feel like they're part of the larger picture here. What do you think colleges and universities can do to kind of address that need of making everybody feel inclusive?
So Andrew, you already talked about distance disparity, why don't you expand on that? Because I think it's right kind of down the line.
I mean, I think some of the things you have to think about are what are the academic kinds of experiences, but maybe what are the kind of informal learning experiences, interactions that are also required, because I think in the case of blended learning, what I often see is there's a lot of focus on the academic types of interactions, which is, of course, where you want to start. But when you're in a co-located kind of context, some of those informal kind of social interactions where trust is being built naturally occur. But when you're in a kind of more blended learning context, those things often don't occur. And so you have to actually think more about those, and how do you kind of be more deliberate about some of those transition periods and how you can build trust. And so we often say trust is like the currency of collaboration. And so how do you start to think about some of the informal interactions and transition periods? And in some ways to do that within kind of this blended learning context is how might you maybe allow the remote attendees to be maybe more prominent in the session. And so maybe you start with asking them questions, or maybe asking students to have their mobile device on so that they can interact with the remote students via the back channel through chat. And so those are maybe just a couple of small examples, but I think if you kind of expand and think about other ways of doing that, I think that would help in making sure that the remote attendees are being treated equally with the local students.
And if I could add to that, so as I mentioned, in March 2019, the challenge was the opposite. Everybody was in person, and you were trying to get the remote people included. So it is also, a big piece of that is culture. But I think something as simple as exactly what John did with the broadcast studio when he started, something as simple as turn your webcams on. I've actually seen teachers make that part of the routine. If you don't have your webcam on, you will likely get messaged by the teacher or the teacher's assistant later because they probably marked you as absent because they're considering you not there because you didn't put your webcam on, which is an interesting move, right? So culturally, that's not that big a shift.
That really puts the focus on engagement, right? And you can read visual cues on how you can see and hear. I think also leveraging tools like Microsoft's chat, right? In universities, educators are looking at how can I get students to participate? If are they being seen and heard clearly with video and audio experiences? Are they able to participate in a way that they're comfortable with? Are they able to chat and give their feedback that way as well? So using the entire suite of the platforms that are being offered through schools also gives you that added benefit for giving that equal voice or making students feel like they're able to have some equity in the classroom participation.
Right. I mean, I think to really think carefully about class culture, class kind of community, and we often say kind of behavior over time equals culture. And so, what are those kind of day-to-day behaviors and practices that you want to promote that will create that sense of connection for the class?
Yeah, I actually love what you were saying about Microsoft Teams, and it brings me back to something that Yamin said earlier. If that becomes your center point, realize that you're not the only school that's trying to figure this out, that other schools have, and that other schools are allowing a lot of their innovations to be shared as part of the Microsoft Teams ecosystem. So not only could you build it yourself, but there's a lot of collaboration and communication add-ons that have come out as a result.
Okay, we got 4 minutes left, guys. So I'm going to ask one more question, and if you guys want to have any closing remarks, feel free to do so. But kind of going along the same lines of what we've been talking about, right? Obviously, to engage people on the far end, make sure that they feel part of the experience, it might actually change how instructors teach. How do you think they're going to deal with that, especially if they're not that great with technology today as it is? So how do you guys think we address that? I mean, is there adoption training there for professors, students, or do you think it gets better over time, or what do you guys feel?
I'd love to go first. I just want to mention very broadly, when Microsoft closed the stores in April of last year, we retained all those employees, and they're right now on a campaign to build and deliver custom training en masse to our customers on any of our technologies. That's the approach Microsoft's taking. We absolutely understand that it takes a bit of a paradigm change. And I remember a short anecdote from a CTO I worked under at Cornell University, Jim Lombardi. He said, when you come to campus, you're driving and you can't believe all these people keep stepping into the road without looking. And then when you're walking, you can't believe all the crazy drivers on campus, right? So always trying to gain the perspective of other individuals. Microsoft's really leaning in and offering that capability. Just reach to your Microsoft account exec if you want to tap into that massive capacity to build custom training with you for delivery to your customers or a train the trainer model.
Mm-hmm. I think, to your question and to Yamin's point, there were a couple of different pieces of the initiative that I worked on, specifically calling out what we did with Northeastern. A lot of times we tried to demystify the technology. That was the first step. So when you were working with a professor, even something as simple as using a headset instead of a desk-based phone, which was something we encountered when we were doing the Teams calls. It's really all about, having the train the trainer, having the materials available for them to learn on their own, but also having plenty of training and opportunity. But really, again, like demystifying the technology is key. You roll that Surface Hub in as an example, or the Broadcast Studio in as an example, and you have just even one person there who's more familiar with it. Or, get a spot, get someone who's an advocate already, get someone who's a little bit more, on the edge of wanting to adopt that latest technology, and show them how fantastic it is to be able to connect the local and remote folks together for communication and collaboration.
Joel, building on that, we really leaned in at Northeastern, as you recall, and over the last year, I believe we've had more than 45 training sessions to different audiences, both in end user delivery and the train the trainer model. So really massive effort there at no cost to Northeastern.
Great, thank you guys. We're coming up on
I got one thing to add, Tom, of course.
Oh, go ahead, John. I was
the closing remark.
Well,
go ahead, John.
One of the big things that we heard, and I've heard repeatedly from professors and instructors, faculty, is the technology just has to work. They're very frustrated going into the classroom, and they want to focus on educating and providing content, a great experience for their students. So that's one of the reasons why we went with the Broadcast Studio, to try to create a self-production. They don't want to have to rely on other people to come in and do and set them up. So we're trying, that's why we have gone forward. And on my presentation, I was changing all the scenes. There was a simple control panel, which you can kind of see right behind me here, that is controlling it. But their big thing is they will use any technology provided as long as it's stable and it works. And they will go forward and adapt. And I don't think we need to be able to provide those solutions to them.
So final comments, John. Let's stick with you since you're the one talking. Final comments.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. It was a great session. We had well over 200 people on the call. You may not notice, but we are using, this was all done on Teams with multiple team calls blended together. Which
not Teams Live. I just want to throw that out there. It was not a Teams Live. This is a traditional Teams call.
It's a traditional Teams call, so it was a little bit different, and it's our first. So we learned a few things here, and I appreciate you all being our guinea pigs, our beta, testers this. But I think it went pretty well. And please follow up if you have any questions or comments. This is really exciting for us, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to move the ball forward for everyone. So thank you. And thank you to the other presenters. You guys did a great job. Thanks. I'll do a virtual clap for you. How's that? A real clap.
Thank you all.
For having us.
Thank you.